I'm not planning on taking it home yet. Kyle Hart had the ball in his hands. Not a replica. Not a photograph. Not a memory that would fade and reshape itself over the years into something slightly different from what actually happened. The actual ball. The one that Shohei Ohtani had just hit 127 meters into the stands for his 29th home run of the season. The one that had landed, improbably, within reach of a man who understood exactly what he was holding. He knew what it was worth. Not in the way a collector knows. In the way a baseball person knows. The kind of worth that doesn't have a number attached to it because numbers aren't large enough to carry it properly. And then he made a decision that nobody in that stadium expected. He didn't take it home. To understand why that decision stopped people the way it did, you have to first understand the moment the ball was created. The Dodgers were in the middle of the kind of game that becomes background noise for a season until something interrupts the noise and makes you pay attention. It was not a close game. It was not a game balanced on a single pitch or a single swing. It was the kind of game where the outcome had already begun to announce itself in the early innings, where the only remaining question was the shape of the margin. And then Ohtani stepped into the batter's box. There is a particular quality to the way a stadium pays attention when Ohtani approaches the plate. It is different from the attention given to other hitters, even great ones. It is the attention of people who are aware, on some level, that they may be about to see something they will describe to someone else later. Something that will require them to find words that feel slightly inadequate for the size of what they witnessed. The pitcher delivered. Ohtani's decision took approximately 1 second. The contact was the kind of contact that announces itself immediately, before the ball has traveled more than 20 feet, before anyone in the stadium has had time to consciously process what their eyes are already telling them. The ball climbed. And climbed. And then it was gone. 29th home run of the season. The stadium reacted the way stadiums react to Ohtani home runs now. With the particular combination of awe and familiarity that comes from watching someone do something extraordinary often enough that you have begun to expect it without ever fully adjusting to it. And somewhere in the stands, Kyle Hart watched the ball coming toward him. Reached up. Felt it arrive in his hands. For a moment, he just held it. What happened next became the story. Not the home run itself. Not the number 29. Not the trajectory or the distance or the exit velocity. The story became what one man chose to do with a baseball after it landed in his hands. Hart made his way through the process that follows when a fan catches a ball of significance. The ushers. The authentication. The quiet, slightly surreal bureaucracy of the moment. And somewhere in that process, a conversation began about getting the ball signed. Ohtani signed it. That should have been the end of it. A fan catches a historic ball, gets it signed by the man who hit it, walks out of the stadium with something irreplaceable. That is the complete version of this story. That is the version that requires no further explanation. But Hart looked at the signed ball in his hands. And he made a different calculation. I'm not planning on taking it home yet, he said. Those words, when they traveled out of that conversation and into the wider world, created a silence in people. The kind of silence that happens when something doesn't immediately make sense but feels, instinctively, like it might make a profound kind of sense once you understand it properly. The reason Hart gave was not what anyone expected. It was not about money. It was not about auction houses or market value or the particular arithmetic of what a signed Ohtani home run ball commands in 2025. Those conversations exist, and they are legitimate conversations, but they were not Hart's conversation. His reason was simpler than that. And more complicated than that. He wanted to give it back. Not back to Ohtani. Not back to the Dodgers organization in any official capacity. Back to the moment. Back to the story that the ball belonged to before it landed in his hands. He had been thinking, from the moment he caught it, about who this ball was really for. About what it meant in a context larger than his own living room. He talked about a kid. A specific kid, not a hypothetical one. Someone young enough that Ohtani's 29th home run would land differently than it lands for an adult who has already accumulated a lifetime of baseball memories. Someone for whom this ball would not be a great story but the great story. The one that defines what baseball means to them before they are old enough to have complicated feelings about the game. Hart had not yet figured out exactly how that transfer would happen. The details were still being worked out in the way that genuinely good intentions require time to become genuinely good actions. But the decision itself was already made. The ball was not going to his shelf. It was going somewhere it could do more. I just felt like it wasn't mine to keep, he said. Not in the way it could belong to someone else. When that story reached the Dodgers bullpen, something happened that nobody had scripted and nobody had anticipated. They reacted. Not in the way a locker room reacts to a great play on the field, with noise and movement and the physical expression of collective excitement. They reacted quietly. In the way people react when something touches a part of them that they don't usually bring to work. Several of them heard what Hart had decided to do and simply went still for a moment. One of them said it was the best thing they'd heard all week. Not the home run. The decision afterward. Another said it reminded him of why the relationship between the game and the people watching it still matters. That for all the money and the television contracts and the analytics and the noise that surrounds baseball now, there are still moments when a person in the stands does something that has nothing to do with any of that. Something that reaches back to a simpler version of what the game is supposed to be. The bullpen is not a place typically associated with sentimentality. It is a place associated with work. With preparation. With the particular focus of pitchers waiting for a role that may or may not arrive. But Hart's decision had reached them in a place below the professional surface. In the place where they were still people who had once been young enough that a baseball could feel like the most important object in the world. One pitcher, when asked about it later, said simply, "That's the game giving something back." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Ohtani was told about Hart's decision. The account of his reaction is not long. It does not involve a speech or a formal statement or a moment designed for cameras. It involves the particular quality of silence that Ohtani produces when something reaches him. The slight shift in expression. The pause that is longer than a pause needs to be if you are simply processing information. He had signed the ball already. He had done the thing that is asked of him in those moments, graciously and without hesitation, the way he does everything that is asked of him in public spaces. He had signed it assuming it would go home with the man who caught it, because that is the reasonable assumption. That is what people do. Learning that it was not going home with the man who caught it produced something in him that was visible without being expressible. A quiet recognition. Not of the gesture toward him specifically, because Hart's decision wasn't really about him. The ball was already signed. The transaction between Ohtani and the ball was already complete. This was about what happens after. About what a person does with a thing once they have it. Ohtani understands, perhaps better than anyone currently playing this game, what it means to be the reason someone falls in love with baseball. He sees it constantly. In the faces of young fans at every stadium. In the way children react to his presence in a way that is different from how they react to other players, even other great ones. He is, for a generation of young people, the clearest possible evidence that the game contains something worth loving. Hart's decision was a small piece of that same understanding. The ball was more valuable as a beginning for someone else than as a possession for himself. The conversation around what Hart did expanded quickly. Not because it was controversial. Because it was unexpectedly moving in a sports landscape that does not always make room for unexpectedly moving things. People who spend their professional lives analyzing exit velocities and launch angles and bullpen management found themselves talking about a fan who caught a ball and made a choice that had nothing to do with any of that. People who had been following Ohtani's home run total with the close numerical attention of historians tracking a record found themselves more interested in what happened after number 29 landed than in the home run itself. That is not nothing. In a season full of remarkable performances, in a baseball year already defined by one player's ability to make the game feel larger than it usually feels, the moment that traveled furthest was a quiet one. A man in the stands. A ball in his hands. A decision made not for cameras or recognition but because it was simply the right thing to do. The Dodgers bullpen talked about it longer than they talked about most things. One of them, near the end of the conversation, said something that stayed with the people who heard it. "We spend so much time thinking about what we give to the game," he said. Hart reminded us that sometimes the game gives back. And sometimes it gives back through the people watching. Kyle Hart still has the ball. For now. He is still working out the details. Still figuring out exactly how this transfer happens. Still making sure that when the ball finally arrives where he intends it to go, it arrives with the full weight of what it is. A Shohei Ohtani home run ball. Number 29. Signed by the man who hit it. Caught by a man who understood, almost immediately, that it was too important to be only his. Somewhere, there is a kid who doesn't know yet that this ball exists. Who doesn't know yet that a stranger in the stands of a Dodgers game made a decision on their behalf before they ever met. That kid is going to find out. And when they do, number 29 will mean something that no statistic can measure. Something that no exit velocity or home run distance can contain. It will mean that someone chose them. Before they even knew they needed to be chosen.